This creature has 8 legs and could live up to 100 years.
When Japan announced it would try to save the world's largest crab, almost everyone laughed. The idea of breeding a creature with legs longer than a car sounded absurd.
These Japanese spider crabs are found in the northern Pacific Ocean, so really deep, very cold water.
But in the fishing town of Heda, tucked along the edge of Suruga Bay, a handful of fishermen, teachers, and scientists quietly refused to give up. Decades later, the same project people once called pointless would turn into one of the most remarkable ocean stories ever told. Tracking the giants of Heda. Picture a small fishing town on Japan's Pacific coast. The wooden docks creak as people gather for something they've done for years. Fishermen in rubber boots stand beside teachers holding clipboards. Children in bright school caps lean over wooden crates, their eyes wide with curiosity. Inside those crates sit the main attraction: giant spider crabs, their long legs folded tight, shells shining from seawater, claws moving slowly as if waking up. The giant spider crab, called Taka Ashigani, can stretch its legs wider than 13 feet. It's the biggest crab on Earth. The people of this Japanese fishing town do this every spring, and every step is set in memory. First comes the short talk, then the measuring, then the tagging, and finally the release. The children gather close as the fishermen lift the crabs from their crates and set them on tables. A steady pair of hands threads a thin plastic tag through a small notch near the shell. The tag looks like a strand of spaghetti, which is why the locals simply call it that. Each tag carries its own number, written clearly in a logbook. Those numbers are how this town keeps track of its deep-sea giants. If someone ever catches that crab again, they'll record the number, the date, and the place. Piece by piece, those small records tell a story of where the crabs travel and how far they go. When the tagging is done, fishermen untie the ropes and start the engines. The small boats pull away from shore, cutting through calm water that shifts from green near the harbor to a deep blue beyond. About a mile out, the engines slow. Each child leans over the side, holding a crab for one last look before lowering it gently into the water. The crabs open their legs wide and drift down, disappearing into the clear depths. There's laughter, a few cheers, and proud smiles. For this town, the day isn't about showmanship. It's a tradition. Every May, for generations, the people of Heda have done the same thing. The practice began more than half a century ago. In the mid-1960s, locals started releasing spider crabs back into the sea. It began as a small act of goodwill, but it soon turned into something lasting. The Chamber of Commerce made it an annual event, adding proper measurements and record-keeping. Each release became part of a long-term effort to protect the crab population. Over the decades, this simple ritual grew into one of Japan's most consistent community-led conservation programs. A quiet project that doesn't rely on government money or fame, only the dedication of people who care about their bay. Footage from May 2024 shows how serious the effort has become. That year, 48 crabs were tagged and released by students in 5th through 7th grade. 10 of the released crabs were females carrying eggs. It might sound risky, but the process is fast and careful. Each one is measured, tagged, and back in the sea within an hour. The children measured every crab carefully, recorded the numbers, and then took the boats about a mile from shore to release them in water roughly 500 feet deep. A year later, reporters returned and filmed almost the same scene. About 40 crabs this time, the same bright caps, the same short trip out to Suruga Bay. The reason is simple. The giant spider crab isn't just a local symbol, it's a major part of Heda's life. The town sits in the deep-sea corner of Numazu City, where the seabed drops quickly into cold, dark water. From this port, bottom trawl boats head out to catch shrimp, fish, and the valuable spider crab. It's one of the most profitable species here, but also one of the most vulnerable. That's why the fishery doesn't stay open all year. Every spring, when the water warms and the crabs begin to breed, the fishing stops. Nets come out of the sea by mid-May and stay dry until early September. The break isn't just a rule. It's the reason the crab population has survived. Without those quiet months, the numbers would fall fast. And in recent years, the people of Heda have seen how fragile the balance can be. Catches have dropped sharply. Local records show that landings are now only about a quarter of what they were 5 years ago, even though the same number of boats still go out when the season opens. The decline has shaken the town. Fewer crabs mean fewer visitors, fewer meals served in restaurants, and less income for local inns. When the catch drops that much, every living crab becomes important. That's why this tagging day, once a cheerful event, now carries a stronger purpose. Each plastic tag represents a hope to understand what's happening under the waves. When a tagged crab is caught again, no matter how far from Heda, the report adds another small clue. A recent review found that only about 2 out of every 100 tagged crabs are ever caught again. None of the recaptured ones in the last 5 years came from Heda's own waters. That means these crabs travel great distances, walk along the pier, and the stakes are clear. Behind the town rise steep green hills. In front lies a deep blue sea that drops away fast. There isn't much land to spare, so the ocean is everything. When the catches are good, restaurants fill up, inns stay busy, and crab stew simmers in kitchens. The children who tag the crabs today will one day work these boats, dive these waters, or guide visitors across them. They're learning something that will stay with them for life. That caring for the sea means caring for their home. But while the people of Heda were doing their part above the waves, scientists inland were facing a different challenge. How to raise these giants from tiny specks no bigger than dust. How Japan learned to raise a giant. The problem was never the big crabs, the problem was the babies. For years, tanks full of tiny spider crab larvae would begin strong and then collapse when it came time to turn into their first real crab form. That single moment, when a drifting larva tries to become a crab, kept defeating the scientists. If they couldn't get past that step, everything else failed. You can't rebuild a population in the sea if every young crab dies in the tank. To see what they were up against, you have to understand how these crabs grow. A giant spider crab starts life as a tiny speck floating in the water called a zoea. It drifts, eats, and sheds its shell to become a second zoea. Then it changes again into something called a megalopa, part larva, part crab. One more shell shed later, it becomes the first true juvenile crab, shaped like the adults but no bigger than a fingernail. This entire drifting stage, both zoeas and the megalopa, can take anywhere from 40 to 70 days, depending on water temperature. Studies showed that cooler water worked best. The early stages did well between 54 and 73 degrees Fahrenheit, while the megalopa preferred between 52 and 64. The sweet spot for most labs ended up around 60 degrees. At that temperature, the full larval cycle took about 54 days. Slightly warmer water, closer to 66 degrees, could shorten it to 40 days. But warmth also meant higher stress. Those numbers came from years of testing. Scientists kept the tanks at different temperatures, counted survivors, and measured how long each stage took. But when the megalopa tried to turn into a crab, everything fell apart. During that molt, the animal's body softens completely. It's vulnerable to infection and stress. The smallest issue, dirty water, bad food, or a bare tank with nothing for them to hold on to, wiped them out. Through the 1990s, researchers in Shizuoka tackled every possible cause. They tested one thing at a time. They discovered that feeding the early larvae freshly hatched brine shrimp worked perfectly. They found that the megalopas lived longer when tanks had a soft base, like coral sand instead of slippery glass. These were simple adjustments that made the difference between failure and progress. Even so, by the early 2000s, many labs were still losing most of their megalopas before they turned into crabs. The scientists knew they were close, but not close enough. So they focused on one question: could cleaner water finally push them through? One study tested tanks with very light doses of basic antibiotics. just enough to slow bacteria without hurting the animals. The results were clear. Tanks that stayed clean gave the megalopas a better chance to survive. Heavy doses made things worse, but gentle levels worked wonders. Around the same time, another breakthrough appeared along Japan's coast, deep ocean water. It's regular seawater drawn from hundreds of feet below the surface, dark, cold, and nearly free of bacteria. Shizuoka happens to have access to it. In 2020, researchers there tried using deep ocean water mixed with mild antibiotics for the first time. And it worked. Survival during the hardest step, turning from megalopa to crab, jumped to the mid-teens, and in some tanks nearly half made it. Compared to the old range of 0 to 6%, it was a major leap. For the first time, the bottleneck was opening. The scientists didn't stop there. They kept at it for years, running new trials and tracking every result. Over 2 decades, Shizuoka's teams raised more than 3,100 first-stage crabs in the lab. One even lived nearly 4 years, about 1,350 days, shedding its shell over and over. It was living proof that the species could be kept alive in human care. Their long record also showed where the real fight remained. The megalopa and the first small crab were still the hardest stages to protect. But now, instead of being impossible, they were challenges that could be improved step by step. People sometimes ask, why not just release the larvae? The answer is simple. They'd never make it. In the ocean, nearly all larvae are eaten before they ever reach the bottom. The purpose of hatcheries is to protect them through those risky early days, to raise small, solid crabs that can walk, feed, and hide on their own. Crossing that step in the lab makes all the difference in the wild. And the work didn't stay hidden in the lab. A major aquarium decided to take on the challenge, raising spider crabs from drifting larvae all the way to visible young crabs. This time, everyone could watch it happen. What had once been quiet progress behind closed doors was about to become living proof that Japan had finally learned how to help its giants begin life again. Inside Japan's aquarium breakthrough. The lights inside Osaka's Kaiyukan Aquarium stay dim, glowing a calm blue that feels like deep water. Along one quiet hallway, visitors crowd around a small side tank. Inside it, tiny, nearly see-through specks drift slowly in the current. Each one is about the size of a grain of rice. And though they don't look like crabs yet, that's exactly the point. In this tank, the Kaiyukan team pulled off something no public aquarium in Japan had ever done before. They raised the giant spider crab from a freshly hatched larva all the way to a true baby crab. They didn't just do it in secret. They logged every step, posted it publicly, and showed people what was happening as it happened. For decades, aquariums around the world could keep the massive adults alive and healthy for years, but their young almost always died before that final step. In the spring of 2023, Kaiyukan's team finally broke that barrier. They began with a batch of newly hatched zoea collected from a mother crab living inside their main display. Each larva was nearly invisible, but the team recorded everything: dates, temperatures, feedings, and every shed shell. Then came the update that made headlines. One of the larvae had survived all the way through the megalopa stage and transformed into a true juvenile crab. In Kaiyukan's main Japan trench tank, the adult giants can weigh around 31 pounds each, with legs that stretch nearly 10 feet across from tip to tip. The babies that started the experiment were the complete opposite. Barely 1/16 of an inch long when they hatched, then doubling in size as they grew into megalopa. Even at that point, they were still smaller than a fingernail clipping. From something almost too small to notice came a creature that, given time, could one day grow wider than a person is tall. The next year brought a tougher update. One of the young crabs that had reached the baby stage didn't survive its next molt. Shedding the shell is how crabs grow, but it's always a gamble. If the water turns a little too warm or too cold, or if the crab can't pull itself free in time, it can die within minutes. Then came a breakthrough that made headlines across Japan. On March 7th, 2025, staff members noticed one of the large female crabs in the main Japan trench tank had released eggs, and they were hatching right there in front of everyone. The tank's water filled with drifting specks of life. The team quickly collected about 300 of them, moved them to a quiet room behind the scenes, and began feeding them carefully. A few weeks later, as the hatchlings turned into the rare Megalopa stage, the team brought a handful back to the public area. The success at Kayukan has already inspired other aquariums and research centers to try the same thing. The lab and the aquarium showed how to raise a giant, but the ocean is still where it must survive, a world far harsher than any tank. How the giant spider crab survives the deep. The giant spider crab spends most of its life along steep underwater slopes covered in sand, stone, and scraps of old shells. It isn't common in shallow water. Most adults live hundreds of feet down, some as deep as nearly 2,000 feet, where the water is cold and the bottom stays quiet. They only rise toward the shallows for a short time each spring when it's time to mate. Then they climb up the slope, gather in roughly 160-foot depths, breed, and slip back down into the darkness. That simple cycle explains why these crabs are so rarely seen, and why they remain one of Japan's most mysterious giants. Down there, survival doesn't come from speed. These crabs are slow. Their advantage is strength, patience, and disguise. An adult's shell is thick, spiny, and the color of rock and sand. They move like part of the landscape, hard to spot, hard to catch, and hardly worth the effort to chase. They win by being difficult to notice and difficult to eat. Young spider crabs play by different rules. When they're small, their shells are too thin to protect them, so they rely on a clever trick: decoration. They pick up bits of sponge, algae, or seaweed and attach them to their shells with tiny hooked hairs, turning themselves into living scrap piles. For predators that hunt by sight, a crab covered in plants simply disappears into the background. In experiments, smaller spider crabs decorated more when predators were nearby, proving it's a defense, not a habit. Their diet matches their lifestyle: steady, simple, and efficient. Giant spider crabs are scavengers. They eat what the sea gives them: dead fish, clams, scraps from other animals' meals, and decaying plants. When something slow and easy crosses their path, like a shellfish or another crustacean, they'll take it. They're bottom cleaners that turn leftovers into energy, and that constant supply of food fuels their size. Because they don't waste energy on chasing fast prey, they can put everything they eat into slow, steady growth. The real danger comes when they need to grow. Like all crabs, they grow by molting, shedding their old shell so a new one can harden around them. It's their most dangerous moment. As soon as the shell cracks and they slide out, the new one is soft and paper thin. For the first hour or two, the crab is defenseless. It can't fight, can't run, and can barely stand. It pumps water into its body to stretch the new shell before it stiffens, but that process takes time. In the wild, a smart crab hides while this happens, wedging itself between rocks or burying in sand until its armor is ready. If it moves too soon, something will eat it. Down there, plenty of creatures are waiting for that chance. One of the most dangerous is the octopus. Big Pacific octopuses are crab hunters. They use camouflage, reach, and raw strength to grab their prey. Their beaks can punch through a thin shell, and their saliva contains toxins that make the crab go limp. Aquarium keepers have long warned that if you house octopuses with crabs, you'll lose the crabs. While octopuses are the top threat, there are others. Large bottom-dwelling fish and scavenging predators cruise the slopes too. But the farther down you go, the fewer hunters there are, and the lower their energy. The cold, dark water works in the crab's favor. Its size and shape make it a difficult meal: too much shell, too little reward. Most predators would rather go for something smaller and softer. When not molting, their safety depends on distance. Adults spread out, keeping long gaps between each other so food lasts longer. Their legs keep their bodies high above the mud, letting them walk over rough terrain without dragging. They're the perfect tool for climbing the rough slopes of Suruga Bay and the deep Pacific shelf. Spider crabs have one more trick for survival: autotomy, the ability to drop a limb. If something grabs them by the leg, they can snap it off along a built-in weak point and crawl away. It looks brutal, but it saves their lives. Later, when they molt, the missing leg begins to regrow. The first replacement is small, but with each molt, it returns closer to normal size. For a creature that can grow larger than a grown man's arm span, the spider crab is remarkably shy. It doesn't fight for territory. It doesn't swarm or defend its young. Its entire life is built on patience. To understand how this giant crab survives, you first have to understand the world it lives in. Suruga Bay isn't just another stretch of ocean, it's one of the strangest and steepest places in Japan. Just past the calm harbor of Heda, the seafloor drops away so suddenly that it feels like the ground disappears. You can leave the pier in a small boat and, within minutes, be floating over water that's thousands of feet deep. Suruga Bay sinks nearly 8,200 feet, while Mount Fuji rises behind it at more than 12,000 feet. That dramatic split is what makes this corner of Japan unlike anywhere else. Long ago, a chain of volcanoes drifting north across the sea slammed into Japan's coast. The collision pushed the land upward and pulled the seafloor down, carving out the deep undersea valley now called the Suruga Trough. On the surface, the bay looks calm, but it hides two worlds stacked on top of each other. Near the top, rivers like the Fuji, Abe, and Oi pour in fresh water that mixes with the warm Kuroshio current coming from the Pacific. That layer is bright and full of life. Plankton bloom, small fish dart through the water, and the surface constantly shifts with color and motion. But go just a few hundred feet down, and it becomes another planet. Sunlight fades, the water chills, and everything slows. The deep layers stay near freezing all year, never touched by storms or surface waves. Down there in the cold and quiet, the giant spider crab makes its home. The shape of the bay is both a blessing and a curse. It allows cold, nutrient-rich water to sit right next to the coast, creating one of the most productive deep-sea ecosystems in Japan. But that same shape also means nothing that sinks ever truly leaves. The bay acts like a trap, holding on to whatever falls into it. During Japan's industrial boom in the mid-20th century, waste from paper mills and factories flowed down the rivers straight into the bay. Because of its bowl-like shape, the sludge didn't wash out. It settled deep in the mud. When scientists later studied the seafloor, they found traces of chemicals that had been sitting there for decades. For the people of Shizuoka Prefecture, that realization changed everything. They saw that a deep bay can hide pollution, but it can't erase it. Local fishers began to understand that protecting the water meant protecting their livelihoods. Over time, tighter environmental laws and cleanup efforts helped the bay recover. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.